Very glad to be talking to you about coping skills. Comes up a lot in health coaching. So we'll just dive right in. For anyone who may not be familiar with our team, there are 7 of us with the OSU Health Plan. Coaching is complimentary for benefits eligible faculty and staff members, as well as adult dependents on the medical plan. And so a lot of what I this presentation today comes from conversations I'm having with people in coaching about kind of coping through stress and what does that mean and what does it do to our different health habits, and how the coping strategies can really be helpful or unhelpful as we work on our health and wellness. Um, so without further ado, what is coping? I always like to start with a definition, so we're all on the same page. It's really just making an effort to solve problems, minimize or tolerate stress, discomfort, conflict. It's this feeling like I can do it, or you got this. That's actually my actual dog, who's a good cheerleader on this slide. And it is just that feeling of just like I can handle what's coming. It doesn't mean there's no problems. It doesn't mean there won't be a little bit of stress that we feel, but generally we feel like we can rise to the challenge. And coping helps us do that. As we're talking about different coping activities, a really important thing to remember is all coping is coping. It is really any activity that relieves stress. And they can run this gamut of very helpful and constructive and kind of in line with all of our goals, really supportive of all the things we're trying to do. They can be kind of neutral, like no effect, right? Maybe we do it and we're just like, that helped not at all, but it didn't do anything bad. They can be unhelpful, kind of either distracting. Um, Maybe they can disrupt other goals, or just have some unintended negative effects. And then they can be outright harmful. There are some coping activities that not only get in the way of things, but kind of take us down with them, right? They might have some really long-term consequences, or just create more problems outside of the ones that you're trying to solve. So, one of the first things, when we're talking about coping strategies, it what falls in the helpful, neutral, unhelpful, or harmful categories is going to be different for every person. I mean, there might be some generalized things like, we might be able to recognize that extreme substance abuse could be harmful, whereas maybe a nice walk around the block, if we're able, could be helpful. But generally, it's going to be pretty individualized. So I really encourage everyone from the outset to think about, what falls into these categories for me? Do I have more in one category than another? And how am I kind of differentiating the different activities that I've got at my disposal? Now, coping strategies can also be active, meaning they help us approach stress. They, again, help us feel capable. They're going to kind of dive in and help us solve the problem. But they can also be avoidant strategies, meaning it's the like, get me away from that stress sort of approach. Maybe, again, they're distracting, or it helps us sort of ignore it or escape from it a little bit, get away from it. Um, these are not to put them in like a good or bad category. Sometimes we need to get away from the stress. Like escaping it is the thing to do. But again, it's thinking about as I go through these categories and the activities that are available to me, are they helping me approach and solve a problem, or is this something I do to get a break from the problem? Now, sometimes our avoidance strategies, can help us like tune out and shut down. And this is what tends to come up a lot in the coaching conversations is, we end up coping in ways that work against some of the other goals that we are working on. So if we're sleeping too much. Exercise is generally thought of as a really good thing, but sometimes people do like exercise too hard or too often. And risk injury or overexertion. I hear a lot about like the retail therapy, just maybe spending too much or spending a little impulsively when we're stressed. The doom scrolling and the binge watching, working even harder. It's the like things are bad. Let me work harder, try harder, do more, which sometimes can make things worse if we're feeling stressed. And then lots of folks turning to like caffeine, sugar, salt, things like that. The kind of quick fixes so we can relieve that stress. Now, the real question here is, as we're looking at all of this, what we want to do is find things in the helpful category that support all our other goals. So what is it if we're diving into these things that are sort of distracting, leading to that kind of numbing out, shutting down? What is it we're actually avoiding? And it's usually the physical felt sense of stress. We're trying to shut the body down. The body's really uncomfortable because stress lives in the body. And um, it's kind of an alarm bell going off that says, like, hey, you should slow down, pay attention. I need something. But a lot of times when we're turning to these coping strategies that are kind of helping us push through, it's usually because we feel like we have to. Now, this is important to point out for a couple reasons. So, one is we want to give our brain and our body a little bit of props that if it is gravitating to some things that help you push through and get through when you really need to, whatever that thing is, that's helpful sometimes. Even if it's not helpful in the long run, sometimes we got to do what we got to do. But I go back to all coping is coping. These strategies, whether we like them today or not, whether they serve us today or not, they came from somewhere. They helped us at one time. And if we're looking at coping strategies that we feel are no longer serving us, they're no longer helpful, then we do need to do the work of kind of creating some alternatives, but without kind of shaming ourselves for gravitating to these things that maybe once upon a time felt like a good idea, right? It was getting us through, and sometimes life requires that. But on the flip side, if we um, stick with those things that no longer serve us for too long, that can be a recipe for burnout. And there's really great um, I haven't read the book, but I just did a webinar with this woman. Her name is Neha Sangwan. And so she wrote this book, Powered by Me. I just did a webinar where she was kind of talking about burnout and kind of coping holistically to try to prevent or recover from burnout. A lot of these kind of sensations, body sensations, come from some of her information. And this is what we're going to look at today is how can we kind of get in tune with what's going on inside of us, where we can make it a little safer to notice that, maybe take care of some of those needs and prevent that burnout through some more constructive coping. So let's do a mini lesson on stress, because that's really, what coping's all about is managing stress. Um, Stress it's a physical and psychological response in the body. It is internal. When we talk about stress, particularly in our culture, we'll say things are really stressful right now, or I had a really stressful day, or I've got a lot of stress going on. Sometimes we're referring to the external circumstances. That's sort of where we're all kind of conditioned to pay attention to is like what's going on externally. But stress is actually the internal experience. It's what's going on in the brain and the body and with our emotions. Um, what we're going to notice, stress is really our sympathetic nervous system kicking into gear. It is our internal stress manager, right? Its job is to kind of take in what's going on around us and inside of us and be like, hey, this might be threatening. We might need to react quickly. Let me get everything geared up so we can move if we gotta, right? And that's our fight or flight response. Um, Ideally, when all of this first evolved, we would have maybe a very acute, immediate threat. We would fight or flee, get to safety, and recover and feel better, and all the stress would be done, and we could just go about with our little group and continue on. But that is not the modern experience of stress. We're in some ways facing less physical threats. We have a lot more psychological and emotional threats today, and our stress is a lot more chronic, even at mild or moderate levels. It just seems to be ever persistent. Which means there's some responses in the body that are never quite turning off all the way. And that's where coping comes in, is can we either prevent the system from like sounding the alarm all day, every day? And if it is going off, do we have things that help us turn that alarm down, so that we can recover? Now, one of the first things I like to help people do when we're talking about stress is kind of get to know what are your stress symptoms. You've got this giant list on this slide: physical symptoms like the fast heart rate, shallow breathing, muscle tension. You might feel emotional things like irritability, guilt, depression, or moodiness. Um, it- Behavioral things like sleeping more or less, eating more or less, crying more, procrastinating. And all those kind of mental cognitive things like feeling a little fuzzy, worrying or racing thoughts. People feel like their memory is worse, their attention span is worse. All those kinds of things can come with stress. What you really want to think about is, what are your go-to symptoms? And can you start to notice the mild to moderate symptoms before we get to the severe ones? Um, if we can start to notice stress in the body at the mild or moderate levels, we have a better ability to deploy some more constructive, helpful coping. So that's really our goal. And what I'm talking about here, we can refer to as our resilience zone. So we all have a resilience zone. It is this kind of inner space where even when we're experiencing different highs or lows, we feel like we can still respond with a lot of flexibility and adaptability, right? It's that sense of, I got this, I can do this. Now we all have a resilience zone, but they might be different sizes. We sometimes refer to this as our window of tolerance. So some of us might have a really narrow zone, some of us might have a really wide zone. That could be because of our life experiences, our upbringings, our neurology, our genetics, our lifestyle habits, our beliefs. It could be because we slept well today and we're feeling a little wider than yesterday when we didn't. Maybe we didn't feel well after lunch and that shrunk our zone. So not only can our baseline zones be wider or narrow from each other, but it can also change throughout the day. And that's really important to remember, because it means we're all going to respond to stress a little differently. And the amount of coping that we're going to need and the type of coping we're going to need is going to be different as well. So it's always good to just remember, to not only, as we're kind of thinking about ourselves and hopefully getting a little more understanding for our own needs and stress, bringing some of that compassion and understanding to others, because we're sometimes working with really different things day to day. Now, all of that to say, coming back to, we all have a resilient zone, and coping helps us stay in it or get back into it if we get bumped out. Now, what it means when we get bumped out, it's usually that chronic stress can bump us out, or a really acutely distressing event or trigger that kind of brings up something that's hard on us. And we can get either bumped high or bumped low and get a little stuck. So, getting bumped high out of the resilient zone is that sympathetic nervous system. That's the kind of hyper aroused extremes of that fight or flight response. And if we're bumped out In this kind of hyper aroused state, we're going to be feeling anxious, restless, irritable, more easily angered and prone to outbursts, really feeling that like rapid heartbeat, the difficulty concentrating. You might feel more easily startled. You might have more tension. More sweating, digestive issues, all of the kind of symptoms that your body's in like go, go, go mode, are going to be a little exaggerated when we're there. What's important to know too, though, is we can get bumped out low. That's into our parasympathetic side. That's a hypoaroused state. Sometimes we can refer to it as like along the lines of the freeze or a shutdown. And that's when we're going to start feeling difficulty concentrating, that low mood, low motivation, the sense of inertia, like everything's kind of heavy and slow and I just can't move. The heart rate might actually be slower as long with the breathing. Just really low energy, kind of withdrawn, shut down. This is where folks feel kind of stuck on the couch. It's like they think I should be exercising or taking that walk because I know it's good for me, but I just can't move. I just can't get myself up and going. That's usually a sign we've been bumped out low. So again, our coping and its connection to resilience is ideally what we're looking for is are there things we can do intentionally with coping in mind, taking good care of our stress response in an active way, right? We're going to be active and intentional and keep ourselves in the resilient zone. And if we can start to get to know our body's responses and look for some of those signs and symptoms, start to recognize when we're getting bumped out, and then intentionally do something so we can get back in and recover. So, in this way, coping can be done before a stressful event if we know it's coming, during it, if we feel like we're getting a little activated, and then absolutely after, so we recover from whatever it was we went through. A few more things, like just kind of definitions to make sure people know. There's a small difference between coping strategies and coping skills. When I was saying any coping is coping, that's really those activities, the strategies that relieve stress. Um, what you use may depend on the stressor, the context, your own expectations. And usually you just need to be aware of the thing you want to do, have access to it, maybe remind yourself to use it when the time comes, or not do it if it's one of those ones you're trying to do less of. And it benefits from a little preparation, but it's not required. In fact, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are as long as you know about them, hopefully you could just call up on the spot if you need it. Coping skills are a little more nuanced. Those are more organized patterns of attitudes and behaviors, trying to get more at the root cause of stress. So now we're getting into like our communication skills, our planning, problem solving, and prioritizing skills. Maybe our ability to kind of build and maintain habits. These might require some deeper reflection, learning and practice, some support and guidance to really kind of get at the root of what might be causing us stress. And we need both of these. We probably have a little bit of both. But again, I offer these distinctions sometimes just to get you thinking about, what do I have in my toolbox already? And what are some things maybe I want to add? The other thing to think about is problem focused versus emotion focused coping. And again, in our culture, we tend to rely on that problem focused coping a lot. That is, there's a stressor, like a thing or an event that's given us challenge. It's given us trouble. And again, we tend to focus externally. So we're like, let me solve the problem. And so we do all the things to solve the problem. And then we go, cool, I'm done, on to the next. And then we just keep going. Um, what we skip sometimes is the emotion focused coping, which is basically tending to ourselves when the stress response is activated. And this is something that is needed even when all the problems have been solved and everything is going well. We have to remember that the body still went through something and it might need a little extra tending to kind of turn off those processes that got started. So this is a lot of what we're going to talk about today because ultimately, if you can learn how to take care of your brain and body and get some of those processes to quiet down, it's going to allow you to access whatever it is you know to do for your problem solving. And I have this little chart that can kind of help you think this through, right? So if you have a problem, whatever it is, you want to think about, can I do something about this problem? If the answer is no, it's just a thing you can't change and you don't have a lot of control over, you really are then looking at resilience, and stress management. It's how do I take care of myself while I withstand whatever the circumstance is, right? Until you can get yourself to a place where it can change or you could get some help or whatever it is you want to do. If the answer is yes, I can do something about this problem, you still want to breathe first, right? Regulate, do something to quiet that inner stress response, those alarm bells that went off, and then start your problem solving process. One of the things, if you are regularly bumped out of your resilience zone, either because you got big stuff happening or you've had a lot of chronic stress at any level, chronic stress over time is going to create this accelerate first, think later kind of habit in the body and the brain, where it's like constant crisis mode where we're always on. And when we're in that really high stress state, again, we're kind of geared up to fight or flee. We're not really geared up for creative problem solving, for collaboration, for engagement, for brainstorming, all of those things that might help us find and use resources. So, my kind of mantra for coping under stress is breathe first, then think. No matter what's going on, if you can breathe first, you kind of get all that stuff inside settled down, and then you can access what it is you need to do. Like kind of best and first tool in your coping skills toolbox is self-care. Self-care is just the practice of taking care of your own health. It is having that active role in protecting your health and happiness, particularly during periods of stress. There's actually a quote, I want to say it's like a Zen proverb. It's about meditation, but it says something like you should meditate 20 minutes a day, and if you don't have time for 20 minutes, then you should meditate for an hour. And I love that because the same should apply to all the self-care behaviors. It is when we don't have the time for it that we need it the most. And this quote, self-care is giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you. That is why, right? We want to avoid that burnout. So we're running on more than fumes as we go about our day. Now, self-care can be pretty holistic. It's our food, our rest, our mental health. Are we connecting? Are we having fun? Are we drinking water? Are we resting and moving? All those basic things. I always say you don't have to be perfect in this stuff. And a lot of times when things are challenging, it's really hard to even do some of the basics. So a really good question that I encourage folks to think about is what choices can I make to widen my resilience zone? If there are things happening that are kind of narrowing that zone, they're draining me, they're kind of taking up my concentration, they're draining my energy. What is it that I could do? One little thing that might buffer against that, right? Can I keep my coping on pace with my stressors? The other thing I encourage people to think about is most everyone, if they really think about it, might have what I call like a cornerstone habit. It's like if everything's falling apart, it's the one thing that if you could just do that thing, it helps all the other things fall into place. For some people, it's taking a walk or some exercise routine. For others, it's a journaling habit that they've got. For some, it's packing their lunch every day. For others, it's going to church on Sunday or hanging out with their family on the weekend. It's whatever that is for you, it's the thing that gives you that sense of peace and centering. And so I always say, if it feels like all your self-care is falling apart, let's just get that one thing back. Just the one, because it can help snowball the others to kind of get going again. Now, for the rest of these tips, I've kind of got them broken down into coping ahead, during, and after. So, coping ahead really is just your planning, right? It means you know something's coming, and you want to increase your chances of handling it well. The most important thing you can do for yourself here is just define for yourself, what does handle it well even mean? What are you expecting of yourself? What are you expecting of the situation? Are those expectations realistic? Um, do you have what you need to handle it well, whatever that means for you? A lot of times when we're anticipating something very stressful, we are focusing a lot on what could go wrong. And so coping ahead is really about thinking what could go well and what can I do now to increase my chances of it going well. So, first and foremost, in coping ahead, you want to acknowledge that something is coming and that you can prepare, accept that it might be challenging, right? You might not feel great, but you could still get through it okay. And then go through whatever planning and preparation that you need. These steps actually come from DBT. They have a very specific like cope ahead skill and structure. And there's lots of great free resources out there from DBT that if it's dialectical behavior therapy, folks are unfamiliar, that I've linked here. So you can kind of take a look at that in more detail, but it's really intentionally, actively asking yourself, how might this situation go well? And what can I do now to help it go well? It is very in line with intention setting. Intention setting is getting a little deeper into that. What does handle it well mean to me? What are the attitudes that I would like to have? What are the emotions I would like to feel? What are my best actions, right? And actually meditating or reflecting on that, writing it out, maybe visualizing it a little bit, being very clear on this is the intent I hope to bring into that situation. The other thing you can do with that is the mental imagery. Like actually plan some time to sit and imagine or write a story. If you're not someone who can like kind of imagine mental images, you can write it out or talk it out in your head. What does this best case scenario look like? There's this great quote, worry is a misuse of imagination. So, whatever you are thinking about, whatever you are visualizing, your brain is practicing. It is forming neural networks along the lines of whatever it is you're thinking about most. There's this little saying, neurons that fire together wire together. And where attention goes, energy flows, right? And so all of that is to say, if you're thinking about the worst case scenario all the time, you are literally practicing stress in your brain and your body. Because even if it's not real intense, your stress response is so sensitive, it's going to be reacting to those stressful thoughts just as it would if the situation was actually happening in some ways. So this whole like imagine what if it all works out is a chance to get yourself out of that anticipatory stress, visualize things going well, at least at minimum, give your brain a break, and maybe through all this intention setting and visualization, come up with some really good ideas to help it go really well. The other thing that you can do is plan for a balance of efficiency and resiliency. And I link an article here. The article is actually talking about like, I think supply chains or something. It's not talking about like people and their schedules. But I love this quote, and I'm going to read it because I think it sums up what we need to do. So it says, an efficient system is not one that only works in the best case scenario, but in most, if not all, scenarios. If the cost of failure is extremely high, say an airplane falling out of the sky, then an efficient system is one with enough backups and redundancies to never fail, because that is the optimal outcome. If occasional failure is okay, then fewer backups and redundancies are needed. However, if we continually underestimate the likelihood of failure and failure's costs, we will design efficient but brittle systems that fail far more often than we expect or want. And the reason why this quote stood out to me so much when I was reading this is because as I've worked with people over the years, we do a lot of over optimizing for efficiency in our calendars. We schedule ourselves to the max, and there's very little wiggle room for unexpected challenges, traffic delays, kids getting sick, anything, right? It's like one little thing goes wrong and the whole schedule falls apart. So, I always like to encourage people to look for like where does resiliency live in the calendar, or does my calendar reflect my values? Can I actually see self-care built in there? Um, Sometimes we have to ask ourselves, what am I willing to give up to get what I want? And that might mean when things get particularly busy, instead of that kind of it's the stress response of like, what more can I do? Can I try harder? What can I add to make this go better? To go, what can I let go of? What can I stop? What can I reduce, so that this can go better? Sometimes we need to build a little more resiliency in. Now, coping during the stressful event, right? Let's say you've planned, you've done your things, but stuff still comes up and you're feeling those body sensations in the moment, right? How do I cope when, um, my heart is racing and my muscles are tense and I'm starting to get really worried? It is that breathe first, then think. And because stress lives in the body, your first kind of tool is learning how to listen to the body, to that internal stress manager. It's telling you where it's at, right? It's telling you what you need. So if you can start to notice those signs and symptoms, again, before you get completely bumped out of your zone, it's going to give you a chance to step in and do something to maybe calm what the body's going through. Your best and first tool should be a little bit of breath work. The best thing I ever heard about breath work, because whenever somebody says just breathe or take a deep breath, like if you've ever been super stressed, that can be really frustrating to be told, like, just breathe, because it just feels so trite. Um, but what I liked about it was if you think about that whole automatic response of stress in the body, the breath is the one piece of that automatic response that we have some conscious control over. It's like an on or off button. And if we can consciously control the breath, we can signal the body to start changing all those other things we don't quite have as much conscious control over. It does all sorts of good things for us by sending us more oxygen, helping our blood circulate better, lowers our blood pressure, and it is managing the physiological symptoms of stress is one of the best things we can do for our overall health. So I'm giving you four of my favorite in the moment breath exercises. Um, the first one is just mindful breathing, which is just observe the breath. Don't have to change it. Just center yourself on the breath. You might close your eyes, just feel the inhales and exhales, and just watch it kind of slow down on its own. You can do some intentional deep breathing. A 10-second breath is usually recommended, like 5 in, 5 out, or 4 in, 6 out through the nostrils, if you can. Breathing deep down into the belly. Now, not everyone can do a 10-second breath right away. Some might need to start with 3 in, 3 out, or 4 and 4. Um, a great way to think about it is just deeper and slower for you, whatever that is. And having a nice even count. The counting really helps. The other one that you can do once you get a nice steady rhythm for your deep and slower breathing, is what's called heart focused breathing. And that just means taking your mind's attention and putting your awareness on your heart, right? Where you imagine your heart to be. Some people find it helpful to actually put a hand on their heart, and just imagine your breath flowing in and out of the heart center. For some people, that's a little easier to focus on than the breath itself, and it still gives the mind kind of a quiet place to settle. So instead of it, scattering and wandering all about with worried thoughts, it can just settle here while you let your breathing kind of calm you down. And the other thing is box breathing. So inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4, repeat in a little box. Um, this can become it's very consciously controlled. You do have to think about it. The thinking about it's going to help your mind settle. And it does teach you that conscious control. You only want to do about 4 to 6 times, so you don't overexert the breathing. But these can be really helpful for a little reset. And to be perfectly honest, they're the types of things that you can do, and most people won't really notice you're doing them. You can do them in the middle of a conversation, especially the mindful breathing or the heart focused breathing. And you can settle yourself, and no one will be the wiser. Some other things you can do in the moment that, again, can be done pretty inconspicuously, any type of grounding. So, feeling your body in contact with something solid and actually feeling that sturdiness, and noticing what that contact feels like, or the sensory grounding. What can you see, hear, smell? There is a practice called soften your gaze, which is just kind of look out and take it all in, let your eyes be soft. Um, when we are stressed, our vision kind of constricts, it actually narrows. If you've ever been rushing, late, stressed out, looking for your keys or something, and they're literally right in front of your face and you've missed them like a dozen times, it's that. It's like we literally can't see because we're kind of focused on some problem. So when we intentionally expand our gaze, soften our gaze, again, it's a cue to the body, oh, maybe I'm okay because I'm able to take it all in. Um, and there's different gestures and movements too, little things to ground you in the present, right? You can hold your own hands, or some people hold like a worry stone, can gently tap the top of your legs. You could do a mini body scan, release some tension, change your position. This is sort of like what can you do with your body that can help you be present? I've got some emotional regulating techniques as well. You can add some positive emotion to your heart focused breathing. These two come from a group called Heart Math. And so this one's called Quick Coherence, which, if you can think of someone you love or something you're grateful for while you breathe through your heart, you almost can't be in a stress state if you're in a genuinely felt positive emotion. So that can really shift your nervous system. If you've got a really intense one, like frustration, anger, really anxious, you can just notice and name. That can really diffuse the feeling a little bit, kind of take its volume down, its intensity down. And you just want to do it kind of from a distance, like this is anger, stress is here. Just notice and name. And then try not to fight the feeling away. If you're noticing one, there's an approach called tend and befriend, which is just maybe thinking about, it's here for a reason, whatever the feeling is, even if it's unpleasant, it says something about your needs. It's trying to help you out. Its methods are just a little uncomfortable. So can you be curious about it? Can you think about what it means about your needs? And just meet it with a little care instead of like trying to battle it away or ignore it. And self-compassion from Kristen Neff is really good. I've shared her self-compassion break with you here. That's a real good one to do on the spot. There's some mindfulness strategies. I'll let you review these on your own, but there's one called STOP, one called RAIN. These are just like little acronyms to help you remember kind of a process that actually combines a lot of things that I just shared, that can help you reset in the moment. If you're someone who likes visualizations, these are two of my favorites. This storm will pass, which is just, again, maybe you're breathing and you're thinking, this is anger, this is frustration. And then you just imagine all those really angry clouds and just visualize them parting with the sun coming. Passengers on a bus is if you have a lot of worried, racing thoughts, lots of things running through your head, too much to do. Especially if they're kind of criticizing or doubtful, you can just imagine like you're a bus driver. There's all these really loud, annoying passengers on the bus, and you get to decide who to listen to, right? Maybe there's a quiet one in there who knows where to go. And you just can't hear them over all the other ones, right? Can you tune into that one that's a little quieter and cleverer, to help you out? As far as coping after stressful events, let's say you get through it, right? Again, even if all the problems are solved, it was still a big day. You're probably feeling tired. You might still be a little on edge. Coping after stressful events is all about helping the body and mind get back to that baseline, that kind of safe, engaged, calm state. We want to avoid that on to the next mentality. And there's a really great podcast. I share it with people all the time. It's, oh my gosh, all the way back from 2020 at this point. Seems so long ago. But Emily and Amelia Nagoski wrote a book called Burnout. And the podcast with Brene Brown was them talking about their chapter about how to complete the stress cycle. And these are great recovery activities. These are talking to your body in body language that will help your nervous system settle down. So it's connecting with friends, laughing, doing something creative, maybe having a nice hug, a nice cry, doing your breathing, or doing some type of movement. Now, in terms of recovery, you can do this after expected or unexpected challenges. So if you know a stressful time is coming, like some people will say, like this time in the semester is really super busy, or, the kids' sports schedule's really intense and we're all rushing around like crazy, you can actually include, if we're going to build resilience into a schedule, maybe a recovery period of fewer obligations after that expected time period. If you have, say, an event coming up, maybe you've got some family gathering that you're expecting to be unpleasant. You could alert your friends and other support people, when it's happening so you have a chance to chat on your way home or the next day. This is all about giving yourself the time, to recover a little bit after something's been intense. Now, if you've had an unexpected stressor, first and foremost, you should celebrate yourself if you made it through. Do a little thinking about what went well, and just, like you're there, you're standing. Some people say, I'm hanging in. That is something to acknowledge. You want to give yourself some downtime or restoration as soon as you can. And some reflection, right? That reflection. What did I learn? Um, was there something that could have gone better? Were there things that I did really well? Even if it felt tough, did I notice that I used some strengths or helped it go a little bit better than times before? I'm sharing just some tips about reflection. If this is something you want to dig into a little more, there's some great guides, that can really help you out with that. And that is all I have for today. I know that was a lot of information, but I am here to take questions, or I would love to hear some of your takeaways or favorite coping strategies.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Yes, let's have some questions or sharing, like she said, your favorite coping strategy, something that's worked for you in the chat. If you have a question and want to unmute yourself and ask, you can do that, but Let's see. Anyone want to share or ask a question? Quiet group today. It was so thorough. People aren't having questions. Okay. Yes, the slides will be sent out. They were sent out beforehand in an email. There was a link to it, but it'll go out again afterwards. So you'll get all the great hyperlinks and whatnot that were in there.
You see folks saying spending time outside, likes to breathe before thinking. Being outside is one of my favorite ones too. There is just something about nature that helps you be a lot more present. There's so much to pay attention to. It's a great place to use the soften the gaze technique because there's always something to look at.
Mhm.
People got the knitting, crocheting, taking a walk, baking, cooking. Those are all super kinesthetic, right? Movement, getting your hands in motion, like getting your body involved again can be super helpful. Let's see, it can be hard to do this in the moment. Yes, it takes practice. Um, I talk about this with my coaching clients all the time. It often feels so hard at first if it's new, and unfamiliar. If you think about what a habit is, it's literally like a neural pathway in the brain that's been so well ingrained, you don't even have to think about it. So if you have some stress habits, doing some new coping habits can feel like moving a river in the brain, right? It takes a while to get it to flow in a new direction, but if you can remember the moments to practice, even if they're small, and just one of my clients, we kind of talk about it like if you're used to turning left, just turn right. And you have to remember, oh, this is my moment, turn right instead. And that helps kind of create that new pathway in the brain, whatever the new thing in that new direction is for you. Someone likes the DBT resources, the visualizing technique. Oh, a filing cabinet. They have a visualization for that, and you can kind of put things away. I love that. I've used that metaphor with folks too, where it's like it feels like you have a big filing cabinet or chest of drawers, and it's like all the drawers spilled open, and it'll be like, okay, which one should I put back first? Or do I want to open this drawer? That's a great mental image to work with. Can you get bumped out of your zone, high and low at once? Probably. There's a lot that can be going on in the nervous system in there. Um, and there's a really great article. I'll see if I can send it to the chat real quick. If I can look it up here. Let me Don't mind me Googling while we're chatting. So there's this great article on up and down regulation. So it's written on a blog, um, kind of specialized towards neurodivergent people, but I always say this stuff is good for anyone with a nervous system. It's just some of us need it a little bit more. But this idea of upregulating or downregulating is getting to know, am I bumped high or low? And then do I need something like if we're low, like we're in that hypo aroused state, sometimes the things we do for relaxation are also low energy things. It's like sitting on the couch or kind of scrolling our phone that like almost um like digs the low in more. We might need something that peps us up, that like wakes our nervous system up to shift out of whatever stress response we're in. And this idea of upregulate, downregulate is that idea. So I like to share that article because I know it can help you get a little more nuanced with what you're choosing. Is there any research on the effect of smiling on our stress response? Um, I don't know that I could quote the research, but yes, I've seen some. It's one of those, you could call it like a somatic, um, movement, right? An action that gets your body involved in a motion that is like intricately connected with positive emotions. And I see this with a lot of people. Will do like positive emotion meditations or visualizations like gratitude, and people will regularly say, "Oh, I felt myself smiling while I was thinking about that." It's like you almost can't help it. And so I think the reverse can happen, right? If you can genuinely bring a smile to your face, it can sort of like cue other things in the body to move along with it. The other one I've done is like if you're prone to like, shoulders and your ears tension, like intentionally slouch a little bit, even if you don't feel like you want to. Um, because again, it can kind of cue the rest of the body to think like, oh, I'm relaxing. Little shifts like that, I think really can make a difference. How do you help those with ADHD who've been using anxiety to be a coping mechanism and need to build from the ground up since the anxiety is managed? Oh, yes. That's a big question. I would probably look at So usually hidden within the anxiety to manage are some what we call compensatory behaviors that were helping us move through the day. It's like the get up and go motivation. It's like we make it so serious. I'm going to be anxious about it. If it's dire, I'll do it. And so you might want to think about, what were those things that anxiety was driving? And what types of behaviors were happening around the anxiety, and are there some flavors of those things that I want to keep? So we take the stress and anxiety out of it, but maybe where that used to show up could cue us to ways to build something similar that doesn't feel so bad. Or just exploring all of this other stuff to see is there something completely different that we could look at. That's probably my simplest answer in a short amount of time. Do you have any recommendations for resources for somatic exercises? Not off the top of my head. I know I know I get emails from something. I think I did a webinar once and they send me all kinds of emails about more webinars. Um, but I think there's going to be some things in the up and down regulating information, and even just Googling somatic exercises for stress or things like that might find you some. A lot of times, what somatic exercises are going to have you doing, which is what we've talked about, um, it's not just like movements or say expressions, but also noticing sensations in the body. So, like, let's say you notice your chest is really tight. Sometimes there's visualizations to help you imagine like unwinding that tension. Um, and so, like, tuning into sensations, if you're noticing a lot of tension, you might tune into a part of your body that feels neutral or good, like a big toe or an elbow, something like that. And there's all sorts of things out there, but it's usually around a little bit of movement or sensation tracking and tuning in. And I know there's lots of resources out there you can Google. Please share about DBT. I believe it's so powerful, but very rare to hear about it. It may help others. So DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, three therapies that are uh, pretty well known, well used, and they're great because they have workbooks and worksheets. You can absolutely do them with a professional. If you've not been exposed to them before, you should. Look into that. But there's lots of resources out there for all of those. DBT is if I can remember them all, it's mindfulness, distress tolerance. Um, I want to say there's something like personal effectiveness. I'm going to forget there's like these components, but it's very structured and it's got a lot of skills teaching, which is really great about it. So when we talked about coping strategies versus skills, if you're looking to build some skills, DBT offers a lot. And there will be people who specialize in that. And like I said, there's a lot of workbooks out there or websites that you can explore as well. I also want to do a plug, if folks are listening to all of this and thinking, gosh, I really would like a little bit of extra help. I think I need some guidance. Don't forget your EAP benefits. Um, you know, finding a counselor or someone who can maybe do that deeper dive with you if you feel like stress and burnout is really a problem. I always recommend getting a little bit of help. It's like, going to the doctor when we have a weird symptom or a pain or an illness. We want to get that checked out. There are mental health, providers that can help us with these things as well. So just want to make sure, folks know about that benefit also. Thoughts on Inside Out 2 and the portrayal of anxiety? I thought Inside Out 2 is delightful. They're both delightful. And I thought their portrayal of anxiety was pretty spot on. Anxiety can show up in a lot of ways, and that was definitely one of them. I thought they did a good job of showing not only what it might feel like inside, but also, kind of the effects on